The twin moons of Oralis cast their silvery light across the crystalline spires of the royal palace. Inside, Princess Serafina Valor stood motionless as royal attendants adjusted her ceremonial attire, the weight of 18 years of royal breeding and expectation heavy upon her slender shoulders. The shimmering fabric, woven with threads harvested from the sacred light moths of the northern mountains, caught the ambient light and transformed her into a living constellation. "Your Highness must remember to maintain proper distance during the presentation ceremony," instructed Lady Vinya, the aging etiquette minister whose family had served the royal household for 17 generations. "The prospective suitors will be evaluating your purity and composure." Serafina nodded automatically, her violet eyes fixed on the distant mountains, visible through the palace's translucent walls. Those mountains represented the boundary of her world, a world defined by bloodline purity, rigid hierarchy, and diplomatic marriages. As the only daughter of King Thalon Valor, her marriage would cement crucial alliances for Oralis in the galactic Concord. The princes of Celestia and Nebulon have both expressed interest. Lady Vinya continued, her voice tinged with pride. Their bloodlines are nearly as pure as ours. The Council is particularly favoring Prince Ardeth of Nebulon, as their crystalline minds would complement our atmospheric technologies. Again, Serafina nodded. She had met both princes at formal functions. Both were as cold and polished as the palace walls, with personalities molded by the same rigid traditions that had shaped her own life. Neither had ever spoken to her as a person, only as a political prize. "Your Highness," Lady Vinya's voice sharpened. "You must focus. Tomorrow begins the presentation week, and your father's council will be finalizing marriage negotiations afterward." "Yes, Lady Vinya," Serafina replied, her melodious voice betraying none of the emptiness she felt inside. "I understand my duties to Oralis." As Lady Vinya finally departed, Serafina allowed herself a moment of unguarded emotion, pressing her forehead against the cool crystal wall. Beyond the palace grounds, she could see the distant ecological facility where foreign workers maintain the delicate balance of Oralis's artificial environments. Beings from dozens of worlds worked there, beings considered too impure to enter the palace except during strictly regulated maintenance periods. Among them were humans from Earth, still newcomers to the galactic community. Oralis nobility regarded humans with particular disdain. Their short lifespans, their messy emotional nature, and their tendency to physically interact with soil and organic matter earned them the derogatory nickname, the Dirty Ones. Royal children were taught from infancy that humans were barely above the service drones in status, useful for their technical knowledge, but fundamentally unclean. Serafina had never spoken to a human. Royal protocol forbade unnecessary contact with lower species, and humans were classified among the lowest acceptable allies. She had seen them occasionally, working in the distant ecological facilities, but always through barriers of distance and protocol. Tomorrow would change that. The Royal Botanical Gardens required inspection before the presentation ceremony, and the ecological engineering team, which included human specialists, had been granted rare access to perform final adjustments. Serafina would be required to oversee their work, maintaining proper distance, of course. Little did she know that this routine inspection would alter the course of her carefully planned life forever. The morning dawned with Oralis's characteristic precision, the environmental systems bringing forth exactly the right amount of sunlight and breeze to create a perfect day. Serafina arrived at the royal gardens precisely at the appointed hour, accompanied by her security detail and Lady Vinya, who continued to murmur reminders about proper protocol. "Remember, Your Highness, the ecological workers are necessary but unclean. Maintain a minimum 3-arm distance at all times, and use the purification mist if you must handle anything they have touched." The royal gardens were Oralis's pride, a carefully curated collection of the galaxy's most perfect specimens, arranged in geometric patterns that reflected the mathematical perfection the Auralians valued above all else. Every bloom was genetic perfection, every arrangement a testament to order and control. As Serafina entered the central garden pavilion, she saw them, the ecological team. Most were familiar species, the serpentine sylvath, the crystalline Mariodians, and a few four-armed quantarians. But one figure stood apart, unmistakably human. He was tall for his species, with skin bronzed by actual sunlight rather than cosmetic treatment, and dark hair that seemed to defy the strict ordering that Auralian males imposed upon their silver manes. He wore the standard ecological corps uniform, but it was marked with stains, actual evidence of physical labor. Lady Vinia made a small sound of disgust. The humans should not be here. They were supposed to send only the higher species representatives. The team leader, a dignified sylvath, slithered forward and bowed. Your Royal Highness, may I present our team? We have completed the primary harmonization, but we encountered difficulties with the Terran-Auralian hybrid specimens. Our specialist, Cale Thorne of Earth, has unique experience with these particular biological interactions. Serafina nodded formally, careful to maintain the prescribed distance. Her gaze, however, was drawn to a small commotion at the edge of the formal garden. The human, Kyle, was kneeling beside a wilting specimen, his hands actually touching the soil around its roots. Such direct contact with organic matter was considered deeply distasteful in Auralian society, where even food was purified and transformed before consumption. "What is he doing?" Serafina asked, unable to hide her curiosity. The sylvath looked uncomfortable. "Forgive him, Your Highness. Humans have unorthodox methods, but he is remarkably effective with difficult specimens." Lady Vinia stepped forward. "He must use proper tools, not his bare—" Before she could finish, the wilting plant suddenly straightened, its pale blue leaves unfurling, and a small bud at its center beginning to glow with a soft light. Cale Thorne sat back on his heels, a smile of genuine satisfaction on his face. "There you go," he said softly to the plant, apparently unaware that his words carried to the royal party. "You just needed to remember your home soil. These fancy nutrients weren't quite right for you, were they?" For the first time in her carefully managed life, Serafina witnessed something truly spontaneous, the joy of a living thing responding to care rather than control. The plant had not been commanded to perform. It had been understood and nurtured. Cale looked up then, seeming to suddenly remember where he was. His eyes, a startling blue like the oceans Serafina had only seen in educational programs, met hers directly. In Auralian society, such direct eye contact with royalty was considered a severe breach of protocol. Yet the human held her gaze for a moment, not with defiance but with a simple, unguarded honesty that Serafina had never encountered. "Apologies, Your Highness," he said, standing and giving an awkward approximation of the formal bow. His voice was deeper than the cultivated tones of Auralian nobility, with a warmth that seemed to resonate in the air between them. "This little one comes from a world where symbiotic fungi help process nutrients. The standardized soil matrix was too pure for its needs. Too pure." The concept was so alien to everything Serafina had been taught that she found herself momentarily speechless. In Auralian culture, purity was the highest virtue. Pure bloodlines, pure environments, pure thoughts. The idea that something could be harmed by too much purity was unsettling. "The specialist will be reprimanded for addressing Your Highness directly," the Sylvath team leader said quickly. "Please forgive the breach of protocol." Serafina found her voice. "That won't be necessary." The specialist was explaining a technical matter relevant to the garden preparation. She surprised herself with these words. Protocol indeed demanded that the human be reprimanded, possibly even removed from the palace grounds entirely. Yet something in his simple interaction with the plant had touched something buried deep within her, a longing for genuine connection that all her royal training had never quite extinguished. "As you wish, Your Highness," the Sylvath replied, clearly relieved to avoid an incident. The inspection continued, but Serafina found her attention repeatedly drawn to the human specialist. Unlike the other workers who maintained careful distance from the royal plants, Kale moved among them with natural ease, sometimes touching a leaf, sometimes adjusting the soil, always with a gentleness that belied his species' reputation for clumsiness and destruction. When the inspection was complete, Lady Vinia guided Serafina toward the exit. "We shall have the air purified once they have departed. Your Highness, the human's presence has undoubtedly contaminated the space." Serafina didn't respond. Her thoughts were occupied with the image of the wilting plant, transformed by understanding and care, rather than by command and control. It was a small thing, insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Yet somehow, it felt important in a way she couldn't articulate. She had no way of knowing that this brief encounter would be the prelude to a political earthquake that would shake the foundations of Auralian society, and her own carefully ordered life. The summons came 3 days later, as Serafina was preparing for the first formal meeting with Prince Ardeth of Nebulon. A royal courier arrived bearing the ceremonial seal of the High Council, the governing body that advised her father on matters of state. "The High Council requests your Royal Highness's immediate presence," the courier announced, his voice carefully modulated to reveal nothing of the reason behind this unusual summons. Serafina felt a flutter of unease. The council rarely involved itself directly with royal family members outside of ceremonial functions. To be summoned during presentation week was unprecedented. The council chamber was a vast circular room at the heart of the palace, its crystal walls embedded with the genetic signatures of every pure-blooded Auralian royal for 20 generations. The 12 council members sat in their elevated seats, with King Thalon at the apex. Serafina noted immediately that her father's expression was unusually grave. "Daughter," he said, dispensing with the usual formal greeting. "Unprecedented developments require unprecedented measures." Chancellor Vex, the council's senior member, rose from his seat. His ancient face was set in lines of deep displeasure. "Princess Serafina, the Galactic Economic Council has issued a directive that impacts our sovereign trading rights. Earth has been granted priority access to crystalline fuel sources in the Outer Rim sectors. This gives humans leverage they must not possess," added Minister Lyra, her voice sharp with disdain. "Their technological advancement has already exceeded projections. If they gain control of crystalline fuel distribution, Auralis's position in the Galactic Concord will be compromised." Serafina listened, confused about why trade politics would require her presence. Such matters were never discussed with her. Her role was ceremonial and matrimonial, not political. "The Earth delegation has proposed a solution," King Thalon said, his voice revealing his distaste for whatever this solution might be. "They have offered a formal alliance with Auralis, with guaranteed fuel access and preferential trading status." "In exchange for what, Father?" Serafina asked, though a growing sense of dread suggested she already knew the answer. "A royal marriage," Chancellor Vex stated flatly. "They wish to elevate their status through connection to the oldest pure bloodline in the Concord." "Impossible!" Serafina gasped, genuine shock breaking through her careful composure. "No Auralian royal has ever married outside our allied pureblood houses. Certainly never a human." King Thalon's expression grew even more severe. "The Council has deliberated for 3 days. Our economic analysts project catastrophic outcomes if Earth gains control of the crystalline fuel markets. Minister Pax has run 17 simulation scenarios, all end with Oralis losing its premier status within a generation. But, Serafina began, only to be cut off by Chancellor Vex. The Council has voted, he announced. The Earth representative has been selected, a specialist with appropriate technological expertise, who is already familiar with our cultural practices. The marriage will proceed in 30 days. Who? Serafina whispered, though in her heart, she already knew. The ecological engineer currently servicing our environmental systems, Minister Lyra said, not bothering to hide her revulsion. Cale Thorne! The chamber spun around Serafina. All her life, she had prepared for a political marriage. She had accepted that love would play no part in her future, that her body and her bloodline were assets of the state. But she had always assumed her husband would be like her, another product of generations of selective breeding and cultural conditioning. The thought of being bound to a human, a dirty, emotional, physically demonstrative human, was beyond comprehension. I refuse, she said, the words escaping before she could contain them. A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. No royal child had ever refused a council directive in the recorded history of Oralis. King Thalen's voice was cold when he finally spoke. You will do your duty to Oralis, daughter. The human will be given appropriate training in royal protocol. You will be given time to adjust to this necessity, but the marriage will proceed. And if I still refuse? Serafina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chancellor Vex answered, his ancient eyes as hard as the crystals embedded in the chamber walls. Then the council will be forced to reconsider your status as royal heir. Your cousin Talira has already expressed willingness to serve Oralis's needs in this matter. The threat was clear. Either Serafina would marry the human, or she would lose everything. Her position, her identity, her place in the only world she had ever known. Stripped of royal status, she would become nothing, less than nothing in Auralian society, where bloodline determined every aspect of one's existence. 30 days of preparation will begin tomorrow, King Thalon declared, signaling the end of the audience. You will spend this time becoming familiar with your future consort, and preparing him for his duties to the royal house of Valor. Serafina left the council chamber in a daze, her carefully ordered world shattered beyond recognition. Marriage to a human, contact with a being who touched dirt with his bare hands, who experienced emotions without filtering them through protocol, who carried the chaotic genetic heritage of a species that had nearly destroyed their own world before stumbling into galactic society. In her private chambers, for the first time since early childhood, Princess Serafina Valor did something entirely unroyal. She wept. The preparation period began with excruciating formality. Serafina was escorted to a newly prepared wing of the palace where Cale Thorne had been installed. Protocol ministers had transformed the space into a training facility where the human would be instructed in the 3,000 essential protocols required for royal consort status. As Serafina entered, flanked by Lady Vinya and 2 protocol ministers, she steeled herself for the encounter. She expected to find the human overwhelmed, possibly even resistant to the rigorous requirements being imposed upon him. Instead, she found Cale Thorne standing calmly in the center of the room, dressed in a simplified version of Auralian formal attire. The silvery material looked strange against his bronze skin, but he wore it with unexpected dignity. Most surprising was his expression, not resentment or fear, but a kind of patient curiosity that reminded her of how he had looked when tending the struggling plant in the garden. "Your Royal Highness," he said, executing a formal bow that, while not perfect, showed he had been studying. "I understand this situation is not of your choosing. I want to assure you that I will do everything possible to make this transition as painless as possible for both of us." His directness was shocking. Auralian protocol required new courtiers to speak only when addressed directly, and then only to answer specific questions. This human was addressing the fundamental reality of their situation without any of the elaborate verbal dancing that characterized Auralian court speech. Lady Vinia made a small sound of disapproval, but Seraphina found herself responding to his honesty. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, using the human honorific she had been briefed on. "You understand that this arrangement violates thousands of years of Auralian tradition?" "I do," he replied simply. "Just as I understand it violates many human expectations about marriage as well." This gave Seraphina pause. She had been so focused on the offense to Auralian tradition that she hadn't considered the human's perspective. "You did not choose this either," she realized aloud. A small smile touched his lips, another protocol violation that Lady Vinia noted with a sharp intake of breath. "Not specifically. No. I volunteered for diplomatic service to enhance Earth-Auralis relations. The details were somewhat vague until recently." "Then why agree to it?" Seraphina asked, genuinely curious despite herself. Kale's blue eyes met hers directly. Still a shocking experience for Seraphina, who was accustomed to the downcast gazes of courtiers. "Because I believe in building bridges between worlds. Because I've spent 3 years studying Auralian ecology and culture, and I see the potential for something extraordinary in cooperation between our peoples." His sincerity was disarming. Seraphina had expected resentment, possibly even the crude behavior humans were notorious for. Instead, this human spoke of cooperation and potential with genuine conviction. "The protocol training schedule has been prepared," Lady Vinia interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with the unstructured conversation. "The human will require intensive instruction in all ceremonial aspects of consort duties." Kale inclined his head respectfully toward the etiquette minister. "I look forward to learning, Lady Vinia. However, I believe Princess Seraphina and I might benefit from some time to become acquainted outside of formal instruction. Perhaps she might show me the ecological projects I was working on before. This new assignment." Lady Vinia looked scandalized. "Impossible! The princess cannot be seen in the ecological facilities. The contamination alone—" "Actually," Seraphina interrupted, surprising herself as much as her attendants, "I believe Mr. Thorne's suggestion has merit. If we are to present a convincing alliance to the Galactic Concord, I should understand his work, and it would be beneficial for him to continue some aspects of his duties during the transition." "But Your Highness," Lady Vinia began. "Prepare appropriate protective attire," Seraphina said with a firmness she rarely displayed. "We will visit the ecological facility tomorrow morning." As the protocol ministers withdrew to make arrangements, Seraphina found herself alone with Kale Thorne for the first time. The human watched her with that same calm curiosity that seemed to be his default expression. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't mistake this for acceptance," Seraphina replied, more sharply than she had intended. "I am merely being practical." "Of course," he agreed. But there was something in his eyes, not mockery, but a kind of gentle understanding, that made her feel as though he could see past her royal composure to the turmoil beneath. The next morning, Seraphina entered the ecological facility, encased in the most elaborate protective suit Auralian technology could provide. The transparent material maintained a constant purified atmosphere around her body, while projecting subtle force fields to prevent any accidental contact with the dirty environment of the facility. Kale Thorne, by contrast, wore only his standard ecological corps uniform. He greeted her with the formal bow he had been practicing, but she could see the hint of amusement in his eyes at her elaborate protective gear. "Is my precaution amusing to you, Mr. Thorne?" she asked stiffly. "Not at all," he replied, though his eyes still held that gentle warmth. "Everyone has different comfort levels with new environments. I'm honored that you're willing to step into mine at all." Again, his sincerity disarmed her prepared indignation. This human had an unsettling ability to redirect tension with simple honesty. The ecological facility was unlike anything Serafina had seen before. Where the royal palace was all crystalline perfection and geometric precision, the facility was a riot of controlled chaos. Plants from 100 worlds grew in carefully monitored habitats, their diverse forms creating patterns that were organic rather than imposed. The air, which Serafina experienced only as readings on her protective suit's display, was rich with moisture and the complex chemistry of living things. Kale moved through this environment with obvious comfort, greeting the other specialists, both human and alien, with an easy camaraderie that contrasted sharply with the rigid hierarchies of the royal court. Many of them looked at Serafina with undisguised curiosity, though they maintained a respectful distance. "This is our primary research area," Kale explained, leading her to a large central chamber filled with plants of varying sizes. "We're developing hybrid ecosystems that can sustain themselves on worlds that have suffered environmental damage." "Like Earth?" Serafina asked, recalling her historical education about the human homeworld's near destruction centuries earlier. Kale nodded, showing no offense at the reference to his species' troubled history. "Earth was our first success story. The techniques we developed there are now being applied to dozens of worlds across the conquered." As he spoke, his hands moved among the plants, checking soil moisture, adjusting growth matrices, occasionally touching a leaf or stem with a gentleness that Serafina found herself watching with fascination. In Auralian society, direct physical contact was rare, even between family members. The easy way this human interacted with his environment was both disturbing and strangely compelling. "This is the specimen you were working with in the royal garden," Serafina said, recognizing the distinctive blue-leafed plant that now thrived in a special container. "Yes," Kale confirmed, a smile warming his features. "We call it Aurora luminis, light of the dawn. It's actually a distant evolutionary cousin to some of Auralis's native plants, which is why I thought it would make a good addition to the royal collection." "It nearly died in our carefully purified soil," Serafina observed. Kale nodded, kneeling beside the plant. "It needs certain beneficial microorganisms, what you might call impurities, to process nutrients effectively." He looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes what appears to be contamination is actually a necessary relationship. Life rarely thrives in isolation." The philosophical implications of his statement were not lost on Serafina. For generations, Auralis had pursued isolation and purity as cardinal virtues. Their technological advancement had allowed them to create environments completely under their control, free from the messy interdependencies that characterized natural ecosystems. Yet, here was evidence that such isolation could be a weakness rather than a strength. "Would you like to touch it?" Kyle asked suddenly. Serafina stepped back instinctively. "Through my protective field, you mean?" He shook his head. "It won't respond to a force field. It's sensitive to bioelectric fields, the natural energy produced by living beings. That's part of what makes it unique." "I cannot remove my protection," Serafina said, though she was surprised to find herself tempted. "It would violate protocol." "Of course," Kyle acknowledged, his tone free of judgment. "Perhaps another time, when you're more comfortable with the environment here." As they continued the tour, Serafina found herself increasingly fascinated by the complex work being done in the facility. The ecological engineers weren't simply maintaining plants. They were designing entire interconnected systems where each organism played a role in supporting the others. It was a fundamentally different approach to environment than the rigidly controlled, isolated perfection of Auralian design. "Your work is more complex than I had realized," she admitted, as they completed the circuit of the main research areas. "Thank you," Kale replied, genuine pleasure in his voice. It's rare to find someone from the royal court who appreciates ecological engineering. Most see it as merely maintenance, keeping the decorative elements functioning. Our historical records indicate that humans nearly destroyed their world through ecological mismanagement, Serafina said, repeating what she had been taught. Is that why your species now focuses so intensely on these systems? If she had hoped to provoke him with this reference to human failures, she was disappointed. Kale nodded thoughtfully. We learned the hard way that everything is connected, he said. Our ancestors tried to conquer nature rather than work with it. The collapse that followed taught us humility. He glanced at her, that direct gaze still unsettling in its openness. Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the greatest failures. Before Serafina could respond to this decidedly un-Auralian perspective, a small commotion erupted at the far end of the chamber. A containment field had failed, and a cluster of spore-producing fungi was releasing its reproductive material into the air. The other workers moved quickly to re-establish containment, but several spores drifted towards Serafina and Kale. Kale stepped forward without hesitation, placing himself between Serafina and the drifting spores. Her protective field would have shielded her, but his instinctive action, placing himself at risk to protect her, was so unexpected that Serafina found herself momentarily speechless. The incident was contained quickly, with no harm done, but the moment lingered in Serafina's mind as they returned to the palace. This human, whom her society considered dirty and inferior, had acted with reflexive nobility. It was confusing. The preparation period continued, with Kyle attending daily protocol training, while Serafina divided her time between traditional royal duties and increasingly frequent visits to the ecological facility. Despite her initial revulsion, she found herself drawn to the complex systems being developed there, and, though she was reluctant to admit it, even to herself, to the human who explained them with such patient enthusiasm. 2 weeks into the preparation period, Lady Vinia delivered a formal request from the Royal Council. The ceremonial garments must be fitted, Your Highness, and the human must be evaluated for appropriate genetic modifications to appear more suitable for public presentation. Genetic modifications? Serafina asked, surprised. What kind of modifications? Nothing permanent, Lady Vinia assured her. Temporary cosmetic adjustments to make his appearance less human. Silver pigmentation for his hair, eye color alteration to match Auralian standards, skin tone adjustment to remove the unseemly darkness. The thought of Kale transformed into a poor imitation of an Auralian male was suddenly disturbing to Serafina. His distinctive appearance, so different from the uniform perfection of Auralian males, had become familiar to her. The idea of erasing those differences felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. No modifications, she said firmly. The purpose of this union is to form an alliance with Earth. Disguising Mr. Thorne's human characteristics would undermine that purpose. Lady Vinia looked shocked. But, Your Highness, his appearance is so primitive. His appearance is authentic, Serafina replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. The alliance will be presented honestly or not at all. Word of this decision reached Kale, who raised the subject during their next visit to the ecological facility. I hear you rejected the council's suggestion to make me more visually acceptable, he said as they observed a new hybrid plant being established in its growth matrix. It seemed counterproductive, Serafina replied carefully. The purpose of our arrangement is to create a visible alliance between our worlds. Kale studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, he said simply. I would have agreed to the modifications if required, but I appreciate being allowed to remain myself. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Serafina, a recognition that beneath the political machinations and cultural differences, they were two individuals being asked to sacrifice their personal autonomy for reasons beyond their control. In that, at least, they shared common ground. As the days passed, Serafina found herself spending more time at the ecological facility than protocol required. She told herself it was educational. Understanding Earth's approach to environmental management would be valuable diplomatic knowledge. But in truth, she was drawn to the atmosphere of the place, both literally and figuratively. The rich, complex air, which she now experienced through a much lighter protective field at her own request, felt alive in a way the perfectly purified atmosphere of the palace did not. And the collaborative, informal way the specialists interacted was a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies of the court. Most of all, she was drawn to Kale's patient explanations and genuine passion for his work. Unlike the courtiers who measured every word for political advantage, he spoke from authentic knowledge and conviction. When he didn't know something, he said so plainly. When he made a mistake, he acknowledged it without shame. This honesty was both alien to her experience and increasingly refreshing. 3 weeks into the preparation period, a crisis arose in the ecological facility. A rare pathogen had infected one of the critical support systems, threatening the entire experimental ecosystem. Serafina arrived for her scheduled visit to find the facility in controlled chaos, with specialists working frantically to contain the outbreak. "You shouldn't be here today," Kale told her, his usual calm demeanor replaced by focused intensity. "The containment protocols are stressing our filtration systems. Your protection might be compromised." "What happened?" Serafina asked, ignoring his warning. "A pathogen from the outer rim specimen collection mutated and jumped to our core support fungi," he explained quickly. "If it reaches the central mycelial network, we could lose years of work." Without thinking, Serafina asked, "How can I help?" Kale looked at her in surprise. "This isn't royal work, Your Highness. It's dirty, possibly dangerous, and definitely not covered by protocol." "I've been observing for 3 weeks," Serafina replied. "I understand the basic principles of the containment systems, and your team is clearly understaffed for a crisis of this magnitude." For a moment, Kale seemed to struggle with the propriety of allowing a royal princess to engage in manual labor. Then, the urgency of the situation won out. "We need to establish a secondary firebreak in the eastern quadrant. Can you operate a basic containment field generator?" "Show me," Serafina said simply. For the next 6 hours, Princess Serafina Valor, 18th in the pure bloodline of Oralis's ruling house, worked alongside ecological specialists from a dozen worlds to contain a microscopic threat. Her protective field was reduced to minimal levels to allow her to operate the equipment effectively, bringing her into closer contact with the dirty environment than she had ever experienced. The work was physically demanding and mentally taxing, requiring constant attention to shifting patterns of contamination and rapid adjustment of containment strategies. Yet Serafina found herself exhilarated by the challenge. By doing something real and necessary, rather than the elaborate ceremonial duties that normally filled her days. Most surprising was the way the other workers treated her. After the initial shock of seeing a royal princess operating equipment wore off, they simply incorporated her into their teams, giving her clear instructions and acknowledging her contributions without the obsequious deference she was accustomed to. She was valued for what she could do, not who she was, a novel experience that she found unexpectedly satisfying. Kale moved throughout the facility, coordinating efforts and making critical decisions with a quiet authority that Serafina had never seen in him before. This was his domain. And here he was, not the awkward human struggling with court protocol, but a respected leader whose expertise was essential to their success. When the crisis was finally contained, with the pathogen isolated and the core system secured, Serafina found herself sitting on a utilitarian bench in the facility's break area, physically exhausted but mentally invigorated. Her elaborate hairstyle had partly collapsed. Her protective clothing was smudged with various substances she preferred not to identify, and her hands, even through the thin protective field, ached from manipulating unfamiliar equipment. Kale sat down beside her, offering a container of purified water. "You were extraordinary today," he said simply. Serafina accepted the water, taking a careful sip through her field's intake system. I merely followed instructions. You did far more than that, Kale countered. You adapted to completely unfamiliar work. You stayed calm under pressure, and you made at least 3 critical adjustments that helped contain the southeastern spread. He looked at her with genuine admiration. Many trained specialists would have struggled to perform as well. His praise was different from the elaborate compliments she received at court. Those were political calculations, carefully calibrated to honor her position while advancing the speaker's agenda. Kale's words were a simple acknowledgement of observed reality. She had done good work, and he recognized it. I found it satisfying, Serafina admitted. To do something necessary rather than ceremonial. Kale nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's why I became an ecological engineer, creating and nurturing living systems that actually sustain people. It's real in a way that many occupations aren't. As they sat in companionable silence, Serafina realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer merely 2 pawns in a political arrangement, performing their assigned roles with resigned dignity. They had worked together as equals toward a common goal, and in doing so, had discovered a basis for genuine respect. That night, as her attendants fussed over the contamination she had been exposed to, subjecting her to elaborate purification rituals, Serafina found her thoughts returning to the day's events. For the first time, she had experienced what it meant to be valued for her actions rather than her bloodline. And for the first time, she had seen Kale Thorne not as the human, but as a skilled individual whose dedication to his work merited genuine respect. The political reality of their situation remained unchanged. In 1 week, they would be bound in a marriage neither had chosen, for reasons of state that had nothing to do with personal feelings. Yet, something had changed between them, a foundation of mutual respect that might, perhaps, make the burden they shared slightly easier to bear. What Serafina could not yet admit, even to herself, was that somewhere during those intense hours of crisis, respect had begun to transform into something deeper and more complicated, a genuine connection to this human who was so different from anyone she had ever known. The day before the wedding ceremony, Serafina received an unexpected message from Kale, rather than the formal communication channels that had been established for their preparatory period. This came through the ecological facilities systems, a request for her to meet him at the research center on a matter of urgent importance. Protocol dictated that she refuse such an irregular summons. Lady Vinia would have been appalled at the very suggestion of the princess responding to such an improper request on the eve of her ceremonial binding. Yet, Serafina found herself ordering her personal transport to the ecological facility without hesitation. She found Kale in a small, isolated research dome at the edge of the main complex. As she entered, she noticed immediately that something was different. The dome's environment was unfiltered, no separation fields, no purification systems, just the raw, complex atmosphere of the experimental ecosystem. Your protection field will need to be deactivated to enter, Kale said by way of greeting. This environment is sensitive to electromagnetic disturbances. Serafina hesitated. In the 4 weeks since the council's announcement, she had gradually reduced her protective measures during her visits to the facility. But she had never completely abandoned the field that separated her from the dirty environment. Is this truly necessary? She asked, though she already knew what his answer would be. Kale never requested anything without good reason. What I need to show you requires direct interaction, he replied simply. But the choice is yours, of course. Something in his expression, an unusual intensity behind his customary calm, decided her. With a quick command to her personal system, Serafina deactivated her protective field for the first time on Auralian soil. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. The air that touched her skin was warm and moist. Carrying 1,000 subtle scents, her filtered experience had never permitted. She could feel tiny air currents against her face, could smell the rich complexity of the living systems around her. Most startling was the sound, without the subtle dampening effect of the field. The dome was alive with delicate rustlings, the soft gurgle of water moving through irrigation systems, even the faint sounds of the plants themselves growing and stretching toward the light. "Are you all right?" Kyle asked, watching her reaction with concern. Serafina took a deep breath, her first direct breath of unfiltered air. It felt alive in her lungs in a way the purified palace atmosphere never did. "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "What did you need to show me?" Kale led her to the center of the dome, where a small garden bed contained a cluster of the blue-leafed aurora luminis plants she had first seen him tending in the royal garden. They had grown considerably, their stems now reaching knee-height, and crowned with luminescent buds that pulsed gently with internal light. "They're about to bloom," Kale explained, kneeling beside the plants. "It happens only once every 3 years, and only under very specific conditions. This particular colony is unique. It's a hybrid I developed combining genetic material from earth orchids and Auralian light-bearing fungi." "They're beautiful," Serafina said sincerely, kneeling beside him without thinking about the dirt that might touch her ceremonial robes. "They're more than that," Kale replied, a hint of excitement breaking through his usual calm. "They represent a true symbiosis between Earth and Auralian biological systems, something many xenobiologists thought was impossible due to the different evolutionary pathways." He looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense in the dome's ambient light. "I wanted you to see them bloom. It symbolizes something important about what we're trying to achieve with this alliance." Before Serafina could respond, the central bud of the largest plant began to tremble. Slowly, delicately, its petals unfurled, revealing an inner structure of intricate complexity. As the bloom opened fully, it released a soft pulse of blue-white light and a subtle fragrance that reminded Serafina simultaneously of Auralian ceremonial incense and something earthy and new. "Touch it," Kale urged softly. "It responds to bioelectric fields." Hesitantly, Serafina extended her hand toward the glowing blossom. As her fingers came within inches of the petals, the light pulsed more strongly, responding to her presence. Gathering her courage, she gently touched the edge of a petal with one fingertip. The sensation was electric, not painful, but intensely alive. The flower's light brightened dramatically, and Serafina felt a subtle vibration pass from the plant into her body, a resonance that seemed to connect her directly to the living system before her. "Oh," she gasped, startled by the intensity of the connection. "It recognizes you," Kale said, smiling. "These plants form connections with the bioelectric fields of those who tend them. I've been working with this colony for 3 years, and they know me." He nodded toward the plant, which was now glowing brilliantly under Serafina's touch. "But that response is stronger than anything I've seen. They've formed a connection with you as well, even though you've only visited a few times." "How is that possible?" Serafina asked, mesmerized by the pulsing light that seemed to beat in time with her own heart. "Auralian biology is highly sensitive to electromagnetic fields. It's part of what makes your species so adept at crystal technology. These plants have inherited that sensitivity." Kale's voice grew softer. "They don't care about bloodlines or political status. They respond to the unique energy signature of each living being." As he spoke, he reached out and placed his hand near hers, not quite touching. The plant responded by sending tendrils of light dancing between their fingers, creating a luminous connection in the small space separating their hands. "Tomorrow we enter a union neither of us chose," Kale said quietly. "I wanted you to see that despite our differences, perhaps even because of them, something beautiful can grow. Earth and Auralis, joined not in conflict but in creation. The metaphor was unmistakable, and far more poetic than Serafina had expected from the practical ecological engineer. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the human, or even Cale Thorne, ecological specialist, but simply a person who had found a way to show her something profound about connection and possibility on the eve of their shared ordeal. Without planning to, Serafina moved her hand slightly, closing the distance between them. Her fingers brushed against his, the first direct physical contact she had ever experienced with any being outside her immediate family, and certainly the first with a human. His skin was warm, the texture different from her own, slightly rougher from his work with the earth and growing things. The contact sent a different kind of electric current through her, not unlike the connection with the plant, but more intense, more personal. Cale remained perfectly still, allowing her to maintain or break the contact as she chose. His eyes held hers, not with demand or expectation, but with a gentle acceptance that made the moment feel safe, despite its radical departure from everything she had been taught. "Thank you for showing me this," Serafina said softly, not withdrawing her hand. "It helps. It makes tomorrow feel less like an ending." "Perhaps it can be a beginning instead," Cale suggested, his voice equally soft. "Not what either of us planned, but possibly something valuable in its own right." They remained there, connected by the lightest touch of fingertips. As around them, the entire colony of Aurora Luminis burst into synchronized bloom, filling the dome with pulsing blue-white light and the mingled fragrances of two worlds united in something new and unexpectedly beautiful. When Serafina finally returned to the palace that evening, she carried with her not just the lingering scent of the Aurora Luminis blossoms, but a profound shift in her understanding of what the coming union might mean. Perhaps, like the hybrid plants, it could become something neither world could have created alone, something unexpected and valuable precisely because of the differences it bridged. For the first time since the council's announcement, she faced the coming ceremony not with dread, but with a cautious, fragile hope. The night before the ceremony should have been one of quiet preparation. Instead, it exploded into chaos shortly after midnight. Serafina was awakened by the palace security system, its crystalline tones alerting her to an ecological disturbance, requiring her attention. Still, half asleep, she activated the communication system to find Alara, her personal security chief, looking unusually concerned. "Your Highness, there's been an incident at the research facility," Alara reported. "Royal security forces have been deployed." Fully awake now, Serafina felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of incident? Is anyone hurt?" "Reports are unclear," Alara replied, her professional demeanor not quite hiding her discomfort. "Chancellor Vex authorized the deployment personally. He claims to have received intelligence about dangerous experimental activities." Chancellor Vex had been the most vocal opponent of the alliance with Earth from the beginning. For him to take such direct action on the eve of the ceremony could not be coincidence. "Prepare my transport," Serafina ordered, already moving to dress. "Immediately." "Your Highness, protocol requires that you remain in the palace during security operations," Alara protested, though without much conviction. "Protocol also requires that the princess be informed of military actions taken in her name," Serafina countered. "Since that requirement has been ignored, I must assume others have been as well. My transport. Alara. Now." To her credit, the security chief complied without further argument. Within minutes, Serafina was aboard her personal vessel, speeding toward the ecological facility. As they approached, she could see the distinctive shimmer of high-level containment fields surrounding the entire complex, the kind used for biohazard outbreaks or radiation containment. "This is Princess Serafina Valor," she announced to the security cordon blocking her entry. "I demand immediate access." The royal guards looked uncomfortable. "Forgive me, Your Highness, but Chancellor Vex has ordered a complete lockdown. No one enters or leaves until the inspection is complete. What inspection? Serafina demanded. What exactly are you looking for? Biological weapons development, a cold voice answered from behind the security line. Chancellor Vex himself stepped forward, his ancient face set in lines of grim satisfaction. We have received credible intelligence that the human has been developing cross-species pathogens under the guise of ecological research. That's absurd, Serafina said flatly. I've spent weeks in that facility. There's nothing weaponized there, only healing systems for damaged environments. With respect, Your Highness, Vex replied, not sounding respectful at all. You lack the scientific background to make such an assessment. Our specialists have detected anomalous biological signatures consistent with weaponization research. Something in his tone, a hint of satisfaction too keen for someone supposedly concerned about a security threat, confirmed Serafina's suspicions. This was no legitimate security operation. It was sabotage, time to disrupt the alliance at the last possible moment. Where is Cale Thorne? She demanded. The human is being detained for questioning, Vex replied. If he is innocent, he has nothing to fear. Serafina knew better. In Auralian justice, detention often preceded evidence rather than following it, especially for non-citizens. If Vex had Cale in custody, the engineer's safety was far from assured. As the future consort of the royal house, Cale Thorne falls under my personal protection, Serafina declared, invoking an ancient protocol that even Vex would hesitate to violate openly. I demand to see him immediately. For a moment, the Chancellor's composure slipped, revealing the frustration beneath. He had not anticipated this level of personal involvement from the princess, who had initially been so revolted by the proposed alliance. As you wish, Your Highness, he finally conceded. But you must observe proper containment protocols. The human may have been exposed to dangerous materials. Serafina was escorted through the security cordon and into the facility. What she saw inside filled her with cold fury. The carefully maintained research areas had been ransacked, delicate equipment destroyed, and containment systems deliberately damaged. This was not an inspection. It was methodical destruction. She found Cale in a sealed containment chamber, surrounded by armed guards. He was unharmed but clearly angry, his usual calm replaced by righteous indignation. Your Highness, he said as she entered, relief evident in his voice. They're destroying years of research, the hybridization projects, the restoration systems. They're claiming it's all weapons development. I know, Serafina replied, stepping closer despite the guard's obvious discomfort. This is political, not security. Kyle's eyes widened slightly at her directness. The Aurora Luminous colony, he said urgently. They're planning to destroy it as potentially hazardous biological material. Those plants represent a breakthrough in cross-species hybridization that could revolutionize restoration efforts on a dozen worlds. Serafina turned to the security officer in charge. Take me to the research dome where the Aurora Luminous is housed. Immediately. Chancellor Vex has ordered complete sterilization of all research areas. The officer replied stiffly. And I am countermanding that order, Serafina said, drawing herself up to her full height and speaking with the authority of 20 generations of royal command. Or would you prefer to explain to my father why you chose to follow the Chancellor rather than the princess in a matter concerning her future consort? The implied threat was clear. King Thalon might support the alliance reluctantly, but he would not tolerate direct insubordination to his daughter, especially not on the eve of a ceremony being observed by representatives from across the galactic Concord. The officer hesitated, then nodded sharply. This way, Your Highness. They found the research dome surrounded by technicians preparing to deploy a molecular disruption field, a sterilization technique that would reduce everything inside to its component atoms. Stop, Serafina commanded, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "This research is protected under the Personal Scientific Development Decree." The technicians paused, looking uncertainly at their equipment. The decree she had invoked was an obscure piece of legislation designed to protect the private research of royal family members. It had rarely been used in recent generations, as fewer royals pursued scientific interests, but it remained valid law. "The human is not royal," one brave technician pointed out. "But I am," Serafina replied. "And as of yesterday, I formally registered as co-researcher on this project." This was a technical truth. She had signed the visitor log during her last visit, which could be interpreted as registration under the broadest reading of the law. The technicians looked to the security officer, who was clearly calculating the political risks of either defying the princess or disobeying the chancellor. Self-preservation won out. "Stand down the sterilization equipment," he ordered. "Secure the dome, but take no further action pending resolution of the jurisdiction question." It was a temporary reprieve at best, but it would buy them time. Serafina turned to Kale, who was watching her with undisguised admiration. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "Political maneuvering is what royals are trained for," she replied, with a hint of a smile. "Now, how do we prove these are not biological weapons before Vex finds a way around my legal obstruction?" Kale's expression turned thoughtful. "We need to demonstrate the true purpose of the Aurora Luminis project." He looked at the security officer. "I need access to the central monitoring systems. The plant's bioelectric responses have been recorded continuously for 3 years. The data will show they're designed for environmental integration, not biological warfare." The officer hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Under supervision only." As Kale worked with the monitoring systems, Serafina used her royal authority to halt the destruction in other parts of the facility. It was a delaying action at best. Vex would eventually bring enough political pressure to overcome her interventions, but every minute gained was another piece of research preserved. In the central control room, Kale had accessed the monitoring systems and was rapidly compiling data visualizations. "Here," he said, pointing to a complex pattern of energy signatures. "This shows the plant's response to environmental stress. They function as biological indicators, becoming more luminescent when ecosystem balance is threatened. It's an early warning system for ecological collapse, not a weapon." The technical specialists examined his evidence with professional curiosity. One by one, they began to nod in reluctant agreement. "The bioelectric patterns are consistent with environmental monitoring, not pathogenic activity," one admitted. "There's no evidence of weaponization potential." Serafina seized the opening. "Prepare a formal report immediately. I want it transmitted to the Royal Council and the Earth diplomatic mission within the hour." As the specialists worked, Chancellor Vex himself arrived, his ancient face tight with barely controlled rage. "This operation is under my authority. Princess Serafina, your interference is inappropriate and potentially dangerous." "Is it?" Serafina countered, meeting his gaze directly. "Or perhaps the dangerous action was launching a military operation against a diplomatic ally on the eve of a formal alliance, based on fabricated security concerns?" Vex's eyes narrowed. "You forget yourself. Princess. The Council." "The Council approved the alliance," Serafina interrupted. "Yet, here you are, acting unilaterally to sabotage it. One might almost suspect personal political motives rather than security concerns." It was a direct challenge, far more confrontational than Auralian royal protocol permitted. Vex seemed momentarily stunned by her boldness. "The evidence is clear, Chancellor," Kale said, stepping forward. "The Aurora Luminis project is an environmental monitoring system, not a bioweapon. Your specialists have confirmed it." He gestured to the data displays where the technical team was completing their analysis. Vex glanced at the displays, then at the uncomfortable specialists who were clearly reaching conclusions that contradicted his claims. His position was weakening by the moment. "This changes nothing," he said coldly. "The human's presence on Auralis remains a contamination risk that cannot be." "Enough," Serafina interrupted, her voice quiet, but carrying an authority that silenced even the ancient chancellor. "You have overstepped, Chancellor Vex. Badly. This was not a security operation but an attempt to sabotage the alliance my father and the council have approved." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Vex could hear her next words. "I know about your private negotiations with the Nebulon delegation. Did you really think royal intelligence wouldn't monitor such obvious treachery?" This was a calculated bluff. Serafina had no specific knowledge of Vex's activities, but his opposition to the Earth Alliance had been so vehement that private arrangements with alternative trading partners seemed likely. The flash of alarm in his eyes confirmed her suspicion. "You will withdraw your security forces immediately," she continued, still speaking for his ears alone. "The ecological facility will be restored to full operation, and you will personally apologize to the Earth diplomatic mission for this unfortunate misunderstanding. If you do not, I will bring evidence of your unauthorized negotiations before the full council tomorrow, immediately after my marriage ceremony." For a long moment, the ancient chancellor and the young princess locked gazes in a silent battle of wills. Then, slowly, Vex inclined his head in the barest acknowledgement of defeat. "It seems I may have been misinformed about the nature of the research conducted here," he said, his voice carrying to the entire room. "In light of the technical evidence, I am rescinding the security alert. Full operations may resume." With as much dignity as he could muster, Chancellor Vex withdrew, taking his security forces with him. As the last of them departed, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the ecological specialists, who had watched the confrontation with increasing amazement. Kale approached Serafina, his expression a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "That was quite something," he said quietly. "I didn't know royal protocol included bluffing." Serafina allowed herself a small smile. "Royal protocol is whatever preserves the interests of Auralis. Tonight, those interests aligned with preserving your work." She glanced around at the damage still visible throughout the facility. "Though I fear much has been lost." "Not the most important things," Kale replied, his eyes meeting hers. "The Aurora Luminous colony survived, thanks to you, and the core research data was backed up in distributed systems." His expression grew more serious. "But Vex won't give up so easily. This was just his first attempt to disrupt the Alliance." "I know," Serafina acknowledged. "But he's lost the element of surprise, and now we know how far he's willing to go." She glanced at the chronometer display on the wall and sighed. "We should return to the palace. The ceremony is in less than 8 hours, and neither of us has slept." As they prepared to leave, Kale paused. "Wait," he said. "There's something I want you to have." He led her back to the research dome, where the Aurora Luminous colony glowed softly in the darkness. Carefully, he extracted a small cutting from one of the plants and placed it in a portable growth container. "This is a viable propagation cutting," he explained. "It can be established in your private chambers, the only place in the palace where Vex would never dare to intrude." Serafina accepted the container, touched by the gesture. "A piece of the Earth Auralis hybrid," she said softly. "A symbol of what we're trying to build." "And a reminder that sometimes what seems impossibly different can create something uniquely valuable," Kyle added, his eyes holding hers. In that moment, standing amid the aftermath of chaos, with the soft glow of the Aurora Luminous illuminating their faces, Serafina realized that something profound had changed. What had begun as a political arrangement she had dreaded now felt like a partnership with genuine purpose. Not just a diplomatic necessity, but an opportunity to create something new and potentially transformative. As dawn broke over the crystal spires of the royal palace of Auralis, Princess Serafina Valor prepared for a ceremony unlike any in the long history of her ancient bloodline. The traditional attire had been modified, still incorporating the sacred light moth silk and crystalline elements of Auralian royal ceremonial dress, but now interwoven with subtle patterns derived from Earth's diverse cultural heritage. In a separate chamber, Cale Thorne was undergoing his own preparations. Unlike Auralian tradition, which would have required him to adopt the silver-toned attire of the royal consort, he wore a garment that honored both worlds, the formal cut of Auralian design, but in colors drawn from Earth's natural palette, with embroidery depicting the Aurora luminis plant that had become the symbol of their unexpected alliance. News of the night's events at the ecological facility had spread through diplomatic channels, transforming what might have been a coldly political ceremony into something more intriguing to the assembled representatives from across the galactic Concord. What had begun as a simple trade arrangement had become a story of intercultural cooperation in the face of opposition, a narrative far more compelling than mere economic necessity. Chancellor Vex had been conspicuously reassigned to ceremonial duties that kept him far from both the ecological facility and the diplomatic preparations. King Thalon, while still not enthusiastic about the alliance, had recognized his daughter's unexpected political acumen in handling the crisis and had granted her unprecedented authority over the ceremony's arrangements. The traditional venue, the Grand Crystal Hall, with its rigid geometric perfection, had been rejected in favor of a location that shocked Auralian society: the ecological facility's central garden, hastily restored after the previous night's destruction and now transformed into a living cathedral of plants from both Earth and Auralis. As Serafina entered this unprecedented ceremonial space, she was struck by the beauty of what had been created in such a short time. The formal Auralian arrangements had been preserved, but were now interwoven with Earth's more organic patterns, creating a space that honored both traditions while becoming something entirely new. The diplomatic corps from a dozen worlds watched with barely concealed fascination as Princess Serafina walked the living aisle toward Cale Thorne. Many had come expecting a coldly political spectacle, the reluctant binding of different species for economic convenience. What they witnessed instead was something far more compelling: two individuals who had found unexpected common ground across vast cultural differences. King Thalon performed the central binding ritual himself, a significant departure from tradition, where royal marriages were typically formalized by the high priest of the crystalline order. The king's expression remained carefully neutral, but those who knew him well could detect a subtle shift in his demeanor as he observed his daughter's composed confidence and the evident respect between her and the human she was binding her life to. From two worlds, one future. The ancient words of the binding ceremony began, suddenly taking on new meaning in this unprecedented context. From separate paths, one journey. From distinct histories, one shared destiny. As the ceremonial crystals were activated, creating the traditional binding field that would symbolically unite the couple, something unexpected occurred. The Aurora luminis plants Kyle had positioned throughout the garden began to glow with increasing intensity, responding to the electromagnetic fields generated by the ceremony. Their blue-white light interacted with the traditional golden energy of the binding field, creating patterns of luminescence that spiraled through the garden in breathtaking complexity. A murmur of awe passed through the assembled diplomats. Even the most tradition-bound Auralian nobles couldn't deny the beauty of this unplanned phenomenon, a literal illumination of the metaphorical joining of two worlds. When the final words were spoken, and Princess Serafina Valor and Cale Thorne were formally bound as partners, the light from the Aurora luminis reached its peak intensity, filling the garden with a radiance that seemed to embody the potential of their unlikely union. In that moment of unexpected beauty, Even the most skeptical observers found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about the limitations of cross-species alliance. What had begun as a coldly political arrangement had been transformed, at least symbolically, into something that hinted at greater possibilities. As the ceremony concluded and the diplomatic reception began, Serafina and Kale found a moment of relative privacy in a small alcove of the garden. "I believe that's what Earth people call making an entrance," Serafina said with a hint of humor that would have shocked her former self. "The aurora luminous display was not subtle." Kale smiled, his eyes reflecting the lingering glow of the plants. "I may have calibrated their resonance receptors to be particularly sensitive to the ceremonial fields," he admitted, "though I didn't anticipate quite such a dramatic response." Chancellor Vex looked like he might shatter from tension, Serafina observed, particularly when the Galactic Concord representative commented on the profound symbolic beauty of the display. "Politics and aesthetics make powerful allies," Kale replied. Then, more seriously, "Are you all right? This day has unfolded very differently from anything either of us expected when the Council made their announcement a month ago." Serafina considered the question honestly. A month ago, she had been a perfect product of Auralian royal breeding, isolated, rigidly controlled, and deeply convinced of the superiority of her world's approach to existence. The thought of binding herself to a human had filled her with revulsion and dread. Now, standing amid the living beauty of two biological traditions, joined in harmonious collaboration, with the man who had shown her the value of diversity and interconnection beside her, she found herself experiencing something entirely unexpected: hope. "I am better than all right," she said simply. "I believe we have an opportunity to create something meaningful, something beyond the political convenience that brought us together." Kale's expression softened. "The Aurora Luminous project was never just about plants," he admitted. "It was about proving that seemingly incompatible systems could not only coexist, but create something stronger and more beautiful through their integration." "A metaphor made literal," Serafina observed. "With your help. Perhaps more than a metaphor," Kale suggested. "The response to tonight's ceremony opens possibilities beyond the limited trade agreement originally envisioned. There's genuine interest now in deeper cooperation between our worlds." As they rejoined the reception, moving among representatives from across the Galactic Concord, Serafina observed how differently she was being perceived. No longer just the pure-blooded Auralian princess performing her diplomatic duty. She was now seen as something more interesting, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of new possibilities. In the days and weeks that followed, what had begun as a political arrangement evolved into a genuine partnership. The interplanetary garden project that Kale and Serafina launched became the visible embodiment of their approach to alliance, creating living systems that honored the unique strengths of different worlds while demonstrating the power of integration and mutual support. Chancellor Vex and his faction continued their opposition, but their influence waned as the tangible benefits of the Earth-Auralis cooperation became increasingly evident. The hybrid technologies emerging from the ecological partnership proved more effective than either world's isolated approach, creating new possibilities for environmental restoration across the Concord. More significant than the political and technological developments, however, was the cultural shift that began to take root on Auralis. The rigid emphasis on purity and isolation that had defined Auralian society for generations began to soften as the benefits of integration and diversity became impossible to ignore. Young Auralians, inspired by the unexpected success of the Royal Alliance, began to question the traditional restrictions on interaction with other species. Educational exchanges with Earth and other worlds increased, bringing new perspectives and approaches that enriched rather than threatened Auralian culture. For Serafina and Kale, what had begun as a diplomatic obligation evolved into something neither could have anticipated: a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The cultural differences that had initially seemed insurmountable became sources of strength and creativity as they learned to see the universe through each other's perspectives. 1 year after their binding ceremony, they stood together in the expanded ecological facility, now renamed the Convergence Center for Planetary Harmony. Around them, specialists from a dozen worlds worked collaboratively on systems designed to heal environments damaged by conflict, exploitation, or natural disaster. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when the Council first announced their decision?" Serafina asked, watching a group of young Auralian nobles working alongside Earth specialists without a protective field in sight. Kale shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "I hoped for cooperation. I didn't dare hope for transformation." He looked at her, his eyes holding the warmth that had become familiar and cherished. Or for the personal changes that would come with it. Serafina understood his meaning perfectly. Both of them had been transformed by their unlikely union. She freed from the rigid isolation of royal purity. He elevated from technical specialist to cultural bridge builder. Together, they had become something neither could have been alone. In the center of the main research dome, the original Aurora Luminis colony had grown into a magnificent living sculpture, its blue-white light pulsing in harmony with the bioelectric fields of those who tended it. No longer just an experimental hybrid, it had become a symbol of the new Auralis, a world beginning to understand that true strength came not from isolation and purity, but from connection and diversity. As Serafina reached out to touch one of the luminescent blooms, feeling its energy respond to her presence, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from terror of contamination to celebration of connection, from revulsion at the dirty human to profound partnership with the man who had gently shown her a different way of seeing the universe. The aurora luminis brightened under her touch, sending patterns of light dancing across her skin. Beside her, Kyle placed his hand next to hers, and the lights between them intertwined in complex, beautiful patterns, separate energies creating something new and extraordinary in the space where they met. Just like them,